of that era that made an impact on you and influenced maybe the direction of your career or any influence at all?
Yeah, they all did. I knew all of them because my father was a clarinetist, but he was also an orchestra manager. Managed the Hollywood Ball Orchestra under Leopold Stokowski.
Wow.
So he knew everybody, and he put out calls for orchestras, and so he had a long list. So I knew all the flute players from the time I was a little kid. And some of them were absolutely marvelous. A guy named Leonard Pasella, who was first flute in the Philharmonic, then he went to his first flute to Warner Brothers. He's a wonderful flutist.
Wow.
I heard him play the Beethoven Serenade once when I was a little kid, and I was just amazed by it. There are others, Archie Wade, who played first flute in the Philharmonic and then went to Columbia Pictures as first flute. He started off as an engineering student at Caltech, and then he got a job playing the flute.
Wow.
A lot of them do that. You'd be surprised at what other things musicians do. But there's a whole bunch of them.
Right.
The early ones. Then in my era, it was Luella Howard. She was first flute at Fox Studios when I went into there under contract in '56. And there was Arthur Hoberman, wonderful flutist. He went to the Paris Conservatory, knew how to play the French style of, the flute playing. So there's a whole bunch of them. I could go on and on.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned Arthur Gleghorn.
Arthur Gleghorn. Yeah, he came in. I guess he came in the '50s. Did Arthur come in the '50s? I don't remember. I think he did. Yeah. And he was sort of a magic man on the flute. He could do anything. He had technique you wouldn't believe. And he was just in another, he was outer space somewhere. He was so good,
Wow. He was a name I was familiar with. He was the principal flutist on Alex North's Spartacus, which is a score.
Well, he'd been principal flute in London with the Royal Philharmonic and some other orchestras. And then when he was about 40, he came to this country. And it took a few years he was playing everywhere.
Wow. Well, I would, it's so fascinating. I wish we had literally the entire evening where we could all just chat about the sessions of, earlier years and the memories that everyone has. I'd like to bring in our amazing panel and ask really everyone what memories you have of working with Sheridon over the years and of special recording sessions that you might remember. I think I'd like to start with Louise. Louise, you were the first flutist I met. I remember David Kraft, a friend of mine, brother of Richard Kraft, introduced us at the recording session when Michael Small was recording Jaws the Revenge. And I remember David introduced me to you as the flutist who had played every Georges Delerue solo that I could think of. And that, of course, established you as legendary in my eyes. But I would love to hear, how far back do you go with Sheridon?
I just learned.
It's a funny story.
When we talked about a week ago, that I was his first flute student.
Wow.
So I was 13 and he was 18, and he taught me a great deal.
Oh my goodness.
Really wonderful teacher. And the other part of the equation in terms of my learning was from my dad, who was a cellist. And my background is huge from musical families from both sides. So I came to the studio business having gotten tired of my job in the Philharmonic, which was awful. Not the orchestra, but I won't go into details, but it wasn't pleasant. I grew up a studio brat because I had a lot of family in the studios.
Right.
So it was perfectly natural, just kind of fell into it. But Daddy said when he would hear things that he thought I needed to do, he would go to whoever that flutist was that he thought did that thing the best. And it was often Sheridon. And he'd pick their brains and he'd come home and work with me.
Wow.
So I had kind of, and I to this day use string playing as an example of articulation. For instance, just thinking of bow strokes and all. There's, for me, the connection to string playing is huge.
Wow.
And long tones. Just,
Yeah.
I would listen to him play long tones forever. And he'd say to me, you only have to play, one group, and we have to do 5 positions. So he did that by the hours, and it became a habit for me to do, if I wasn't working, a couple of hours a day, just long tones. For all you who hate to do them, they pay off.
Well, it really shows, just even between the two of you, how much shared history and connected history, certainly in this town, has always, shown that, where so many lives are interconnected.
Well, in our early years, Sheridan and I did an awful lot together. First and second flute, didn't matter who did what. We were a team because
We played well together.
we really did, but gee, why?
Yeah, we played very well together.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
would, because, my roots were with you, so.
Yeah.
And our roots together were with Sheridan's teacher, Hokenberg, who unfortunately died quite young, but I think it
How
was
long did you study with Hoken?
till he died, I think, he was unfortunately very young.
That
He
was in
46.
his 40s, yeah.
You were in the
But he was a
service.
phenomenal teacher, because he was my teacher.
I know.
And I have to interject one little thing, is that to me, the teacher is the only thing for me. I'd studied flute and I didn't get anywhere. I went to this guy in 6 months. I was a pretty good player. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, he had everything worked out in his head.
Right.
And knew how to express what he'd learned. He'd go in the garage and do experiments on the airstream and how to manipulate that with your embouchure. And he was very good at being descriptive, and in fact, he got me one of my first professional jobs outside of the Philharmonic. Actually, it would have been before I got in the Philharmonic. I was 17, and he sent me to do a Monday evening concert. And from there, the audiences were full of big composers, and Schoenberg and Stravinsky and people like that would be in the audiences over the years.
Yeah.
And they heard me play, and it kind of, if you can get exposed and
That's what
people
happens.
like what they hear, that
Yeah.
it snowballs from there.
It's amazing. Jim, do you recall the first session or early sessions that you played with Sheridan, and memories of really anything over the years?
I have. I'm going to give you just a quick general summary of why people on this panel were very important in my life. I'd been in the LA Phil, and I was about to turn 40, and had a good run, and had started doing some work in the studios. And the contrast was really, really interesting for me, especially in terms of the teamwork that was absolutely critical. So wherever I would end up in a section next to Sheridan or next to Louise, the absolute rule was it has to be good. And when you've got people like that sitting to the left of you, it's just a great role model to be a part of. So for me, I liked that, in fact, the essence of a team was what it was all about, as opposed in the Philharmonic, we had our momentary teamwork, but a lot of times it was a much more individual thing. And I loved that the intonation was never an issue with this whole crew, because everybody's there working together.
Right.
And I never met a more well-rounded, better musician than this guy. I mean, pianist, piccolo job when you were 19, I believe, in Denver.
17.
17, sorry. I thought he was 13. So, to be in the presence of that kind of talent was awe-inspiring for me.
That, if I could interject to that, one of the reasons I left the Philharmonic was because the teamwork in the studios was so good, and it was always enjoyable. We had a good time. Everybody got along, and it was weird to me that while you had a contract in the LA Philharmonic and there was none, so all of us should have really been at each other's throats, it was just the opposite. It was much more friendly on the outside. And I said, Sheridan and I worked together a lot together, and actually all of us.
Well, I think that's probably the result of the personalities at play. The players who were sitting in the sections, and you know, it's the people. Everything is the people and the relationships.
And also going to a film studio and doing a movie was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was a little kid. I was 20 when I was under contract at Fox, and my mother would say to me, "You like to go to work?" I said, "Yeah, I have a good time there."
Yeah.
And Lionel Newman, Al Newman's brother, he was the funniest guy on earth. So I'd go to work, and I have a great old time watching the movie and listening to Lionel tell jokes.
Wow.
Yeah.
David, how early do you go back with Sheridan, and what memories?
We've known each other for a long time. When I was out of town, when I came back, Sheridan welcomed me back and really made me feel good and helped me out. And I always looked up to him, both Louise and Sheridan. And Sheridan had he was a master of looking relaxed. You could see that. He still is.
Play position.
He was the only guy that could do that. You got to play with his legs crossed and just look like it was nothing. But I remember one time with Sheridan, we were doing John Barry's score to King Kong, and out of nowhere they asked for improvised stuff going on piccolo. I think it was piccolo, wasn't it?
What was it for, King Kong?
For King Kong, yeah. Yeah, and
who was the composer?
John Barry. It was.
John Barry. No, there was also the High Road to China. That was another one.
Okay, yeah. Why I remember this one is because this is when they're King Kong is coming and they're going Kong, 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 and Sheridan is just freaking out on the piccolo, and it was just great.
Remember.
It's in there.
Wow.
Anyway, we've been good friends for a long, long time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How many? 50 years?
Yeah, something like that.
Ouch.
At least.
We've been around a long time, all of us.
My goodness.
We're still here.
Still going.
We're still here, yeah.
Jerry,
Yes.
what are your memories of Sheridan over the years? And
Well, he was my first flute teacher after college, so I got to study with him. And then I went on to Louise, so it was the same lineage, which was great. Wow. And then when I started working with them in the studios, what I loved about it was Sheridan just set this tone of, we're a team, let's problem solve. If the music comes to us and it's not playable or it's not written right, we'll just fix it. And his attitude was always just cool. And when you'd think you'd get flustered, like there was some conductor that was going on and on and on with so many words. And Sheridan would just lean over and say, "They talk too much." You don't need to listen to all of that, which was great. But his attitude was cool. And his heart and soul were very much about, let's get this job done. We respect the composers. We need to do what they want, and let's get it done. So he just set this really great attitude about do your best, but don't take it too seriously, and you don't get nervous about it. Just let's get this done.
yeah.
And good camaraderie, very good camaraderie.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Jerry.
Yeah.
Paul,
Let's see, try the mic.
memories?
Is that working? Yeah. Yeah, I have very fond memories of coming to California in 1985 after being in the Boston Symphony for 12 years and being in Pittsburgh for 3 years and principal of the Boston Pops under John Williams. It was really a nice feeling, and Sheridan was very welcoming to me and made me feel very comfortable. And I think amongst this group, I think everybody, maybe even Jimmy Walker was there, but we had some fun times working for the Michael Kamen score for Robin Hood. That was one of my favorite scores, actually. we had a lot of doubles, and everyone had a lot of doubles, and it was a huge orchestra. I mean, just huge, and I mean, it was fantastic, and my, you know, the level was absolutely superb. I mean, that's what's great. You know, there was no drop off whatsoever, period, from my experiences prior to coming to LA to playing with these wonderful players, all of them, you know, wonderful flutists. I remember, I remember that Patty Zametti brought out some kind of a huge doubling slip for me. It was really ridiculous. You know, everyone normally has a little doubling slip, but maybe I had asked her about doubling too much, so she had this giant slip she brought to me. You know, it was just pretty funny, I thought. You know, you have to have a sense of humor in life. You know, it was great, and I was kind of the new guy in town, you know, so at the time. But anyway, Sharon was always very welcoming, and so was Louise. Everybody here, really. You know, so.
I wanted to interject one thing. My favorite Sheridan story, he told me this many years ago. He said, you know, one of my neighbors asked me one time what it's like to be in the arts. And he said, I'm not in the arts, I'm in the music business. Never forgotten that one.
Wow. Well, Sheridan, you have played for some extraordinary composers, some of the most legendary of all time. You played for Max Steiner, Hugo Friedhofer.
That was my first call.
Your first session?
Recording session. First recording session was with Max Steiner. I was probably 19 years old, and I was playing the 6th flute in the orchestra, and I was happy to be there. And that's where I started. It was Republic Studios, which became Tadayo, where they did many recording sessions and many movies.
What a first act! What a beginning!
Yeah, I mean, didn't do much on that picture, but that was my very first call. But the first big thing where I started playing a lot on was The King and I at Fox. I was working in Vegas, and I'd fly in during the day and work at Fox, then fly back to Vegas and work a show at night with the Alberghetti family.
Wow, wow! And also during those years, Alex North and Franz Waxman, Hugo Friedhofer,
when I was
Jerry
under
Goldsmith.
contract, Alex North was there, and Hugo Friedhofer, Franz Waxman, of course Lionel Newman, and Alfred Newman.
Alfred, yeah.
Lionel wrote some of the scores. Alfred did most of them. And a guy named Eddie Powell was the genius behind all these. He was a master orchestrator and did a lot of the composing too.
Do you know, have particular memories of any of the other composers and kind of what impression they made on you? You know,
Well,
playing
they all
for
made an
Goldsmith
impression.
or North.
You know. They're all different. One thing about being a composer and then getting up and conducting the orchestra, there's nowhere to hide. And so each one had a very peculiar, different personality, and you got to know them in a funny way. And they're all different. Some were introverts, some were funny, some had sort of weird personality quirks, you know. It had nothing to do with the way they wrote the music. But I really enjoyed them because I enjoyed the music, I enjoyed what they did. And being in Hollywood, they had at their disposal any instrument you could possibly want.
Right.
I mean, they'd go off to Europe, to London or some other place, and they'd write the same thing they did in Hollywood, and people didn't have the instruments. But in Hollywood, they had them. All these weird percussion instruments and other things. But anyway, the composers, there were so many good ones, I wouldn't know where to start. There was a guy named Pat Williams, who wasn't as well known as some of the others. To me, he was an incredible composer. Anyway, I could go on and on. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, just remembering the composers. Are there any other, comments of remembering playing for a certain composer that stand out, or that anyone would like to share?
I just remembered another Sheridan story. Working for Pat Williams, this was in the time when they were using synthesizers a lot, and a producer came in and asked Pat Williams how he got that great flute sound. And he says, well, I used a flute. But that was Sheridan.
And that was really very funny. They were so used to hearing synthesized music. Pat came out of the booth just howling with laughter when he heard that one.
Yeah.
I have a Sheridan story, short one. The way Sheridan would warm up come to work. No concertos, no, fluff. He would just come in, grab his flute, start on C, and blast down to low C, play it as loud as he could, and just go whop. And then that was it. Then he'd grab his bass flute and play Midsummer Night's Dream on the bass flute and put it down. And he was set. That was it. That was your deal. I don't know if you remember, you used to do that all the
Yeah, I
time.
remember I did that.
Oh,
I used to
yeah.
be able to do that.
He still does it every day.
Oh, yeah, right. Practice every day.
Wow. A more general question about kind of writing for flute. Do any of you have any impressions on the way composers like Delarue and Barry, Goldsmith and North, Morricone, all these great composers, it seemed, featured flute solos and featured flute textures in their scores so prominently. Are things different, or do composers write differently for flute in more modern times than they did remembering kind of the era that we're really focusing on right now?
Yeah, very, very much so. Very much so. Now, because the films are more, there seems to be more action, more suspense, and budgets are different. It seems like the woodwinds, not just the flutes, are kind of in the back of the bus at the moment. And the flute, when it is involved, vibrato is not, you can't do those lush, beautiful solos very often because of the way the films are. I think it's just because of the content that it's mostly different. So now it's more about just getting almost like a sound design color that goes with whatever's going on these new types of pictures. For the more animated films, that's the only place where you can really start playing expressively because of the animation, and they need to have some heart and soul put into it to make the film come to life.
Right.
But no, the days of those beautiful solos, that's not really happening so much now.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much of the iconic melodies that we remember. So many of those are flute lines.
He would go in the booth, Sheridan would go in the booth and listen, every time there'd be anything going on. He'd go in the booth, check it out, check out the room, the miking, to make sure that his vibrato was really conveying what he wanted for the scene. But there was time to go in the booth and listen. And he would really come back and say, hey, in this scene, we should just cool it, or we should do this or this. And we don't have that luxury anymore either because of time constraints.
Time goes so quickly.
Yeah, but the vibrato is a big difference from that day and now times. Yeah.
Well, as I said at the top of this discussion, I wish we could sit here all night, but we have a whole second half of a concert to perform. But it's been such a thrill sitting here with all of you and sharing these memories. And I hope everyone to hear, have a first hand hearing of these stories, I think, is a pretty exciting thing. I'd like to thank all of our amazing panelists here. Paul Freed, Louise Di Tullio, Geri Rotella, David Shostac, Jim Walker, and Sheridon Stokes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you, Sharon.
For narrating this. Thank you.
Thank you.